So now I want to talk a bit about JavaScript object notation, otherwise known as JSON. So you can take a look at the interview that I did with Douglas Crockford about the discovery of JSON. The key thing, and he's very humorous when he talks about this, JSON is not something that he really invented. It's really just part of JavaScript, and it's been sort of extracted from JavaScript in ways that are used outside of JavaScript. And it's a way to serialize data and transmit it from, say, PHP to JavaScript. And so it's a wire protocol, a serialized wire protocol that just happens to be inspired by how constants are written in JavaScript. And so just to sort of review, JavaScript has two kinds of list container objects. The first is a list, which is just a linear zero-based list, sub0, sub1, sub2, with square brackets as the constant and as the index operator, but it also then has objects, which are key value pairs. And the thing that's a little weird about JavaScript is that objects and associative arrays are kind of the same thing. They're just key value pairs. And so the thing that has confused me over the years, the thing that confused me over the years was that you could use syntax that looks like object-oriented syntax, like balls.soccer, or associative array syntax, balls sub quote lacrosse, and they are the same by the time it's all said and done. They are the key value pairs. And so this syntax, which in a language like Python or other, we'd think, oh, that's a dictionary, and there's a different language for objects. Well, this turns out to be an object in JavaScript, and that's not a big deal. It's just that after a while, you get a little confused. If you see somebody using the same thing with these two syntaxes, they're really equivalent. Okay? And so the JSON syntax is a simplification of the JavaScript constant syntax. And so you can have things like strings, you can have integers, you can have booleans, you can have a list or an array. So use square brackets for lists and curly brackets for objects. And so you can nest these things. And so here we have an object named who, and it has an element or a member or a key of offices that itself is a list of strings. Here we have a key of skills, which itself is an object. So we have an outer object, and then we have inner object within it listed as skills. And so you can nest these as much as you want. You can have lists of objects or objects with lists, and it can go further and further. I mean, you could have in here, this could itself be another list or another object. So it can go as deep as it needs to go in a very hierarchical way. And so once this JSON syntax was identified as something useful to go across multiple languages, then people it always worked in JavaScript, but then people built JSON libraries in languages like PHP and Java and C and C# and all these other languages, so that those languages could generate JSON. And then the JSON could be consumed by languages. Now you could easily have a PHP talking to another PHP, and they're exchanging JSON. It happens to be JavaScript syntax, but it's JSON, okay? And so there's really useful and great libraries inside most programming languages. So let's take a look at a little bit of code. This is in JSON01.zip zip in my PHP-Intro website. And the first thing I want to just show you is the syntax. Now, this is kind of a little weird in that this is JavaScript, and this looks like JSON, okay? It's kind of the JSON I just showed you. This is executable JavaScript. This is the constant syntax, the syntax for defining constants in the JavaScript programming language. That's what it is. So who equals is just a variable, equals an object with these four keys in it, Chuck, 29, true, a list of strings, and another object. And so it just window.console.log. So let's just sort of take a look at this. Okay, let me clear this. JSON 01, JSON syntax, right? Let me show the log. Okay, so this is now an object, right? And it just was JavaScript. It's executable JavaScript. So that's kind of the weird thing about JSON is not only is it a syntax for serialization and deserialization, it also is legitimately executable JavaScript. Crazy and cool at the same time. Okay. So the next thing I want to show you, so that's how you kind of make JSON in JavaScript. But now I want to show you how you make JSON in PHP, and then how you pull JSON from the server and pull it into JavaScript. So the first thing I want to show you actually is this right here, this JSON.php. So this is a bit of code that creates a PHP code, JSON.php. It creates an array with the key first mapped to the string first thing, second mapped to the string second thing. And then it calls this built-in function. I mentioned that when JSON became popular, all these languages added JSON libraries. Well, PHP has it built right in, JSON_encode. What you pass in to JSON_encode is a PHP object or a PHP array. Whatever it is, it'll look through it, look through the hierarchy of it, and it will produce a string. So JSON encode returns a string with curly braces and greater than and square brackets and colons and quotes. That's legit JSON based on this. So it's as simple as, here is a PHP data item and give me the JSON representation for that. And then I echo it just to print it back out. So let's take a look at how that works. So if I just run json.php, it comes out as curly brace, first colon first and second colon second string. So this now is legit JSON. This is a JSON constant, and it is the output. So if I do a view developer console, now it takes a second. So if I do a network, and let me just hit refresh here, it takes a second because there's a sleep 1 on purpose there. Okay. This is all sort of extra junk. Don't worry about that. That's just CSS my browser's adding, so ignore that. The only thing that really matters is this. So I am hitting the URL json.php. I'm doing a GET request. It's a GET request to that. And the response is this. Curly brace first. This is the output of my PHP. It's the output of the encode statement. So this is super powerful and super simple. So I keep saying it a bunch of times so that you get it right. Super powerful and super simple. This is, stuff is a PHP variable. JSON encode gives you back a string with curly braces and quotes and colons and stuff. And echo just echoes that out. And that's exactly what we're seeing. What we're seeing up here is kind of a pretty printed version of it. This is really what came back. It's trying to pretty print it for us to make it a little bit easier. All this other junk is just my browser's adding that. But this is what really came back. This is the output. This here is the output of JSON_encode. I echoed it, of course, and that's why it comes out as the response to the thing. Okay? I hope you get that. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to show you index.php. And this is the code that is running right here. It's index.php. So there's a bunch of stuff in here, but the interesting thing that it does is it loads JQuery, and then it calls document ready. This is the pattern to say, when the document's finally loaded, then run this code. And if you recall, when I did the post code, it said $post. This is a different thing that's kind of like $post, but it's called $getJSON, which means it's going to do a GET request and pull back to a URL and then pull back the data. Okay, so it's going to call the URL json.php, and then it's going to do a request. Then when the response comes back, it is going to call us and call us this function, the second parameter, which is our function, and call us and pass in the data. But the difference is this point, it's not a string. It's a JavaScript object or list, which means it's been parsed, right? So the curly brace in this case is an object with a variable, with a method, well, or with a key of first and second, okay? And so it's already parsed. And so then what I can do is I can just say data.first. And what is data.first? Well, that's the string that's the key first in the return JSON. And away we go. And we'll just console log it so we can kind of see it. So let me clear this, clear that. So if I view the network here, JavaScript console, if I view the JavaScript console, let me clear this, and then we'll hit the refresh. So this index, let me just do a view source, view page source, there we go. So here we see it all. It loads JQuery, and it says when this document is done loading, then go grab some JSON, and then it's really only it's gonna put some stuff in here. Starts, the word before is in ID equals back, $back says go find the tag with the ID back, and changes HTML to data first. That's data sub first, I guess is the best way to think about that. And it says before. And then it does some console messages. So watch this. It's going to be cool in slow motion. Let's see. Should I see the console messages or the network? Let's do the network. Now, I hope you can see this. It should take about a second. First thing, when I hit refresh, it's going to say before, and then a second later, it's going to turn to first thing. So watch when I hit refresh. It says before. Now it's getting some JSON. Oh, it retrieved the JSON and pulled something out of the JSON. So if you look, the response to the original get had that string as before, and then it loaded jQuery because it had to, and then it called JSON and got that variable first thing, second thing, right? So first maps to first thing, second maps to second thing. And then if you look at the code, I simply go and say, go in, grab data.first, which is this string, because this is a string when it comes back from the server, but by the time it's coming in here, it has been parsed, and it's an object, because the curly braces have been parsed. It's deserialized. It's parsed. And so just pull out data.first, and that's how first thing ends up here. And then if I go take a look at the log, you can see that this isn't we are logging data, which is the parameter that came back, but it is the JSON, but it's the converted JSON. It's converted to an object, and we console log it, and it's an object, and it has a key of first that maps to first thing, and a key of second that maps to second thing. So in just a few lines, I mean, it's very misleading that this is so few lines of code. I basically have in one programming language an object or an array of an associative array with this line and this line. So I make an object in PHP, and then I do this, and then I have the same object converted to JavaScript. So I basically make objects in PHP, fire them out as JSON, pull them in to JavaScript as JSON, automatically parse them with the help of jQuery, and I just access the member variables that are in there, access the key value pairs that are in there. And so, in a sense, between here and here, there's a lot of work going on. A lot of work going on. But we don't have to worry too much about all that work. It's pretty dang impressive, actually, if you think about it. It's so much easier than serialization was like 10 years ago. Okay, so let's talk about an application that is going to make use of some of this. So this is one that I really like. It's basically a chat with an asynchronous updating of the chat data. Okay, and so at the beginning of this, well, let's just play with it first. Here is this application running, And basically the idea is I can say hi, and it says hi back to me. And I can actually open this in a second window as a different person. All right, so I got two windows now, and both windows are going to see. So I can come over to this window and say window 2, and I hit chat, and I come over here to window 1, and it sees that from window 2, right? So this guy, they are asynchronously updating and getting each other's chats. And the way to see this is the developer console. And what's happening is it's using JSON to get all of the, if I go to network here, it's calling chatlist.php, and it's getting a list of the current chats. And so when I change the current chats, another in window 2, a moment later, it goes and grabs it with another chatlist.php, and so there's a third chat. And so it's using JSON and JQuery and a timer loop to sort of keep all these windows simultaneously up, okay, and going at the same time. Okay, so it's this asynchronous chat, and then I can reset all the chats, and then this guy will reset as well. I don't have to hit the reset both sides because a couple of seconds later. So that's what's going on with this chat. So let's examine some of what's going to happen here. So the first thing that we've got is the standard posting request response cycle stuff. And if it's a reset, we're going to store the chat. We're going to store the chats as just an array in the session because we don't want to use a database quite yet. And so if we get the reset button set, which we can just say is set post reset because we named the reset button reset in the HTML. And we change the session, and then we redirect back to ourselves. If there's a message, it actually creates either an array if it needs to, but then it puts in the date and the actual message that came in and redirects. Okay, and so this post will take this array of chats and go ch-ch-ch-ch-ch. And so if we see that in the code, we see this array of chats. We see this array of chats that comes back. Well, now the chats it's an array. It's an empty array because I just reset it. Okay. Okay, so that is the top part of this file. Then down here in the middle, we load jQuery, and then we go down, and we see the chat code. And here we got a basic form that posts back to ourselves. We have a text field, we have a submit. I've got a little link to chatlist.php in here as well. And then we got a reset button. And then we have a div. And it's called chat content with an ID of chat content. We stick this ID in because we can grab that with jQuery, right? And we put a spinner in there. Okay, we put a spinner in there so that it shows loading with an alt text of loading, so the spinner is there while it's loading. Then, continuing down, we have a function called update messages. Okay, and what this basically does is it'll start on a timer every 4 seconds, and we'll talk about how the timer works. It does a log. It does an AJAX call to get some to this URL called chatlist.php. Cache equals false keeps your browser from only retrieving it once and believing that it already has the data. It does this by adding a get parameter of the time so that it forces the browser to get a new one every time. And if we have a success, then we get the JSON data back and we log it. We log the actual data. We empty out the chat content, and you will see that this is a list. It's a list of an array of arrays with message, comma, date on it. And so we write a for loop. This is a JavaScript for loop, right? And so for var equals I less than data to length I++, that's going to loop through all the chat messages, and then it pulls out the chat message, and the sub 0 entry is the actual message, and the sub 1 entry is the date of the message. And then once that's all done, so once we have cleared out the chat content and read the data from the return JSON and stuck it into the chat content of div, we empty it out and then we append line, 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 paragraph, paragraph, paragraph. Each of these things is a separate paragraph. And then we do a set timeout. This is a JavaScript call, not a JQuery call, that says wait 4 seconds and then call ourselves again. So update message sort of grabs the data, empties out the chat div, and then puts all the chats in the chat div, and then says call me again in 4 seconds. And so it calls. It defines the function, then says startup complete, and then it calls update message once at the beginning of the program to get the whole thing started. So it retrieves the messages right away. Now, one of the things I should probably do here is I should probably just put this sleep in all the time. In chatlist.php, all it does is it sends back JSON to our application. And sleep 5 makes it so the thing moves slowly enough so we can see what's happening. And I should probably just leave the sleep 5 in all the time. And so header content, so we put a content type header in. This is good hygiene. Everything we've done so far, it's been application text content type, but by telling it it's real JSON, that's good. So this is a good thing to put into before any data has been sent. It's another header, just like location header, except this is a content type header saying what I'm about to send you is not just HTML, it's not text, it's not a JPEG image, it is actual JSON, and it's going to be an UTF character set. So I just check to see if I have any chats yet. If I don't, I create an empty array, but then I simply echo using JSON encode the variable that's in session chats, which is an array of two item arrays where the message and the date, message, date. And so it just takes this whole thing, JSON encode, turns that into a string and echoes it out. So we will see chatlist.php, okay? So let me show you sort of again how that works. Let me go in first. Oops, come back. Hang on. So in chatlist.php, I'm going to uncomment this 5-second sleep just because it makes it easier to see what's going on. Okay. So I'm going to clear the console log and then sort of start fresh. I'm going to hit index.php, and what we see is we see the spinner because we haven't yet overwritten what's in the chat content div. So there's a chat content div. Go back and take a look. There's a chat content div. Now we've asked for chatlist, but chatlist is taking a long time. So, but finally chatlist came back, and so we got no chat messages, but we did overwrite the spinner. So the spinner's gone now. Okay. So now I'm going to go over into the other window and I'm going to type yo. And then I'm going to come back and we're waiting, and at some point our 4-second timer is going to expire, but remember it sleeps 5 seconds, so it's going to be around 9 seconds. So at some point down here, there we go. So at some point we did this JSON request. It's going to happen every 4 seconds now. We did this JSON request and we emptied out that chat content div, and then we got back an array of arrays. So this is the first element of this is the message. The second element is the date of the message. So we looped through this little list, we wiped this out, and then we looped through the list and put it in. So I'm going to go over in the other screen and I'll put a second message in. So I'm going to hit chat. Now we'll come over here, and in a moment it's going to do another 4-second timeout and then 5-second delay, and then it will get another one. So here we go. We just got another one. I think, oh, it's waiting. It's not done yet. It's starting. Now we got a response. So that was the 5 seconds, okay? So now you see we have 2 messages. So that little JavaScript for loop clears this whole div out, and then it loops through and prints out the message and the date of the first one, the message and the date of the second one, and it puts that thing out. And so that's how we achieve this, right? It's basically, if we take a look at the code, we are having every 4 seconds call this function, and then we get some JSON. We ask for the URL chatlist.php. And when this is done, it calls our success function after it's parsed the data. So it's really in JavaScript as an array at this point. So we write a little for loop and make a little paragraph for each of the entries, and the 0 entry is the message and the 1 entry is the date. So again, this is all pretty simple stuff, but you can kind of see how you can compose these things to have jQuery cause JavaScript to happen with a timer, to use JSON, and then change the DOM. So we're sort of flipping between JavaScript and jQuery, and eventually we're changing the document object model without a full request response cycle.